Hi everyone, and welcome to The Global Gaze, where we talk art, film, and books by and for the global majority. I'm your host, SarahJilani, and I'm an academic, freelance arts writer, and a lifelong third culture kid. So if you're interested in creativity and storytelling coming out of Africa, Asia, and more, you're in the right place. Today, we're taking on one of the most artistically and politically consequential questions for writers from around the world. What language should you write in? Now, this may seem an obvious question, whatever your native tongue is, right? But when we look a little deeper into the history, we see that it's not quite that simple. European colonization shaped the globe for at least a century, if not more. Britain, France, Germany, Portugal, and Spain colonized various parts of Africa, Asia, and South America. And when they did, they often imposed their own language in these regions. You may say, okay, well, there aren't really many colonies left anymore in the world, right? In the 20th century, a lot of these colonies gained their independences, and now most of the world are independent nation states. Well, there are more colonies today than you might think, although they do look kind of different to what they did 100 years ago. But that's for another day. So since most of the world are now independent nation states, then why may it really matter what language writers choose to write their novels, short stories, and poetry in? Because language is never quite neutral. Under European colonization, European languages, English, French, Portuguese, often became the language of power in colonies. That was the language that you needed to know and use well in order to actually get through to the administrative structure, probably to be able to get a decent education, and to even be able to get a job and feed your family. Let's take Africa under colonial rule as an example. You would have been taught to read the Bible. Your own oral storytelling traditions would have likely not been allowed in school or in any public places. Your schooling, if you got to have any, would certainly be in a European language, and you would often even be punished, sometimes physically, for speaking your mother tongue. Jomo Kenyatta, one of the founders of modern Kenya and a key player in the Kenyan anti-colonial struggle against British colonial rule, put it in a really effective way. He said, "When the missionaries arrived, the Africans had the land and the missionaries had the Bible. They taught us how to pray with our eyes closed. When we opened them, they had the land and we had the Bible." So language wasn't just a tool, it was a means through which the colonizer often disciplined and assimilated their subjects. Fast forward to the 1960s, when many places in Africa gained their independence from colonial rule. In 1962, a group of young writers met in Uganda at Makerere University. It was the first major African writers' conference. There, they debated a key question. Should African writers write in European languages or in African languages? Remember, there is that loaded history behind this question. So a decision about this is a decision about power, memory, and the voice and future of your people. Chinua Achebe was at this conference. He is the author of the novel Things Fall Apart, which is largely credited as being the first English language novel written by an African. Born in Nigeria in 1930, Chinua Achebe spoke Igbo at home and English at school. He described his life as being lived, quote, at the crossroads of cultures. Achebe was the OG third culture kid. At the conference, and later in a 1965 essay, Achebe argued for appropriation, taking English, reshaping it, and using it to tell African stories. This actually happens all the time to living languages. Think about how there's different kinds of slang between the generations. What's swag to us millennials is Riz to the Gen Z folks. Achebe argued that by fashioning out an English that could carry the rhythms, worldviews, and ideas of his own culture, you would actually be delivering a heavier blow to colonialism than if you stopped using that European language altogether. He believed an African writer could subtly undo the dominance of standard English and make the language theirs. He said, "Let no one be fooled by the fact that we may write in English, for we intend to do unheard of things with it." So for Achebe, an African writer writing in a European language was not a betrayal. It was an excellent strategy for both authenticity and global reach. But not everyone was convinced. Ngũgĩ wa Thiong'o, a young student who was also at the conference in Makerere University at the time, disagreed with this view. At first, Ngũgĩ wrote in English under the name James Ngũgĩ, but by 1972, he had made a radical decision. He had decided to stop writing novels in English and write them only in his native tongue of Gikuyu, which is a majority language spoken in parts of Kenya and East Africa. His reasoning? Language, he argued, shapes how we see the world. He believed that if Africans continue writing in the colonizer's language, they'll continue to think on the colonizer's terms. Ngũgĩ said, language carries culture, and culture carries the entire body of values by which we come to perceive ourselves and our place in the world. We all know from everyday experience that there are some untranslatable words, and this is more due to the culture that surrounds those languages than necessarily a failure in a translator's skill. So for Ngũgĩ, writing in African languages, and there are hundreds of them, was the only way to restore cultural values after colonization and to build a future that begins from a place that is authentic to his people. So Achebe says to global writers, master English, use it however you will, reshape it and make it your own, depending on your culture, worldviews, and stories. Ngũgĩ says, leave it behind. It is way too bound up with really painful colonial histories. So who's right? Well, that's probably not the right question at all. Both writers make a great point because they are proposing ways to respond to what is essentially the same power structure. Literary scholars sometimes call this abrogation and appropriation. Abrogation is rejecting the authority of the colonizer's language, refusing its claim to represent your reality. Appropriation is bending it to your needs, inserting your cultural reality into the colonial tongue, and thereby making it something new altogether. So Achebe, he's advocating for appropriation. Ngũgĩ, he's advocating for abrogation. Either way, this tension creates a new literary space. English becomes pluralized. It becomes unfamiliar. It's no longer the so-called Queen's English. It becomes Nigerian English, Indian English, Caribbean English, London multicultural English. But on the other hand, we can't deny that the global publishing structures are still dominated by the English language. Global writers do know, as do their readers, that they're more likely to sell books, to find publishers and agents, and to generally build up an audience of readers if they write in English. We can definitely celebrate the fact that we have many Englishes, so to speak, but we also have to ask, does that really change the power structure of the way that literature is made and circulates around the world today? So this isn't just a historical debate. A lot of global writers today have to ask the question, how do I reach global audiences without impoverishing my own mother tongue? Who gets to be global? Who gets to be local? And who gets to be both? Thanks for watching this episode of The Global Gaze. If you liked this topic and you have an opinion about it, give us a shout out in the comments below. What do you think? Do you think appropriation or abrogation is a better strategy for global writers to follow? And before you go, don't forget to give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. Thanks so much, and until next time, keep your gaze global.